Hi guys, and I am so happy to be here today. My name is Jennifer Smith Jochen, and I am the owner and founder of Smith Curriculum and Consulting here in Fort Worth, Texas. And today I am going to talk to you about setting up math workshop in your classroom successfully, but also some ins and outs of being able to do it not only in the classroom, but also through remote learning. So today we have a lot to talk about. I'm going to condense this down into 3 different videos. So you're going to have 3 different videos to watch. The first 2 videos are a lot of the information behind Math Workshop and strategies and tips and tricks and data and information. And then in the last video, we're actually going to get into working through some activities to show you how to implement different activities in your classroom right away. So without further ado, I am going to flip over and do a screen share of my presentation. So you're not going to see my face anymore, but you are going to see my video of my screen, my slides, and you're going to hear me. So I hope you're ready. Let me move these out of the way. So as I said, today we're going to talk about setting up math workstations for success in your classroom. This session is geared towards middle school math, 6th through 8th grade, but can definitely be altered to fit other grades as well. So why should we use Math Workshop? Why? There are many reasons that we should use Math Workshop. And the first and foremost being that it is centered on the student. Students are working with each other or even independently at times and being able to work on activities that meet the needs of their learning. As you can see in this classroom, this is a classroom that I did some consultation with, and these students are working in small groups, they're working independently, they're transitioning as needed, and they're all actively engaged in what they are doing. And that is what we want with Math Workshop. Students actively engaged with their learning. Now, I'm going to give you some more information behind this classroom right here. This classroom had, oh, that date's wrong. That should say 2017, not 2010. This teacher, in 2017, the students had an October benchmark and 32% was the average. At the end of the year, 84% were passing. Now in 2018-2019, when she implemented Math Workshop with her 7th and 8th grade classes, or her 8th grade classes, I'm sorry, the students had gone from 7th grade regular classes, they were at 72% approaching the standards. And 8th grade regulars, when they finished after a year of Math Workshop, they were at 81%. Now, that may not seem like a huge jump, but 9% is big. We know it's big when it comes to our state test. And then when you go to her honors classes, in 7th grade, when they were in 7th grade honors, they were at 29% mastered. Next year, after a year of Math Workshop, in 8th grade algebra, they were at 42% mastered. Now, those are low numbers. Yes, we know this, but we also know the state of Texas has some skewed passing rates. So that's just some of the things I want to do. And that is the teacher only doing Math Workshop once a week, which I will talk to you about later on. So think about that. And that's part of the reason I put that quote there. Failure is not the opposite of success. It's part of the process. When we show students how to work through failure and how to achieve more through independent learning and small group learning, they're going to see the process and they're going to communicate with their peers on how to be more successful. And that success is going to make them want to achieve and want to show you. So, how do we achieve success in Math Workshop? Well, I broke it down to this. smart and simple planning, understandable tasks, cooperative grouping, clustered learning, engaged learners, spiraled learning, and my favorite of all time, working smarter, not harder. That quote right there, if I could tattoo it across my forehead, I would. I mean, I could, but I wouldn't. It is my favorite quote of all times. Work smarter, not harder. And we know as teachers that that is something that we have to do every single day. So let me break these down for you. Smart and simple planning. When it comes to planning for math workshop, I did math workshop in my classroom. I had 42 minutes from bell to bell. And you may be like, Jennifer, how the heck did you do that? How did you do it with 42 minutes? We barely get enough time for them to come in, sit down in their seat, get started for the day. Well, this is how I did it. In my classroom, we did math workshop twice a week. That's it. That is how I fit it in. The other 3 days were for instruction or assessment or review or other things like that. Now you're like, well, that's cutting down on my teaching time. No, it's not. Because during those 2 days a week, my students would come in, the first person from the stations would grab the activity, or they would go to their activity, and they would do station 1 for 20 minutes. And then they would do station 2 for 20 minutes. And then we would wrap up and clean up in those last few minutes. Now, really those 20-minute stations were more like 18. And I would let them know, okay, it's about to be time to switch. They would start packing things up, cleaning things up, putting it back in their station box, and getting ready to move to the next station. So that way, cleanup time at the very end wasn't necessarily taking that 5 minutes. I got to add it into the time that they were in each station. So in my classroom, typically it was Monday and Tuesday were instruction, just as normal. Wednesday and Thursday were math workshop, and Friday was either instruction or assessment or review, things like that. It kind of broke up the monotony. Now, in my class, we did 4 stations. So on the first day of the week, 2 groups did 2 stations, and the other 2 groups did the other 2 stations. I typically had more than 1 set of each station so that I did not have groups of 6 or 7 kids. I could actually have groups of 4 students. So there may be 2 groups at the math fact station or the at your seat station, and that's perfectly fine. And you may be asking, well, what am I doing during this time? Well, that's a great question. During this time as a teacher, once you have implemented math workshop in your classroom, you are pulling small groups. Now, you may only get to 2 small groups, maybe 3 small groups during the day, during each day that you're doing math workshop. But since you're pulling from those students that are working in their math stations, which I'll talk about more in a little bit, you're going to get that extra lesson in. And you're going to get to be able to follow up with students on a lesson from the week, or go in depth on what you taught on Monday or Tuesday, and answer their questions and follow along with your curriculum during that time. So you're not missing out on an instructional day. You're instead going deeper in that smaller amount of time with a lot less students. So instead of 25 to 30 students that you're teaching 4 to 6. And we all know that we can get a lot more accomplished with a lot fewer students in a lot less time. So that's a benefit of math workshop for sure. Well, let me show you how you can set up math workshop. Now I have this for in-class and for remote. First, we're going to go over in-class math workshop. When setting up in-class math workshop, I tell teachers, give me 4 weeks. Give me 4 weeks and you're golden. Reason being is it takes time to get from go all the way back to go. You can't just go anywhere on the board when you're playing Monopoly. You have to start at go. And so this is our way of starting it. Go. The first week you implement math workshop and you want to do math workshop in your classroom, you put your students in their small groups, and all of the small groups in your classroom are doing the same task. So there's only one task out in your classroom, but they're all doing the same. You as a teacher are then facilitating their understanding by monitoring and reinforcing positive behaviors. Don't spend time with the negative behaviors. Just jot it down on a Post-it note and address it later. Because if you take time to address the negative, kids stop. We know they stop what they're doing and be like, okay, what's going on over there? And they're totally out of tune with what they're supposed to be doing. We want them working on their task. We want them working in groups, because during that group time, they're communicating. And as we know in our standards, communication in math is very, very important. It's in 2, if not 3, can't remember exactly, I think it's 3, of our TEKS problem-solving standards. And in Common Core, it's in 2. So we know that communication within the math classroom is huge. Our students need to communicate, not just with us as a teacher, but also with each other. Because when we allow students time to communicate with each other, their understanding shoots up. Because while Johnny may not understand something, Sally may understand it. While Sally may have took it in one way and Johnny took it in one way, Tabitha may have heard it a different way. And they all talk together and they develop a deeper understanding. I know myself that when I go to professional development and I'm sitting in a group of people I don't know, and when I finally get comfortable to be able to talk, because it takes a little bit, and I'm able to put my little 2 cents out there and listen to other teachers that are around me, I'm like, oh, it totally starts clicking in a different way. Or value is added by the other students in the group. Now, week 2, students are still in their groups, but they're doing 2 different tasks. So the first 20 minutes, they're going to do one task. And then once 20 minutes is up, you're going to start modeling that behavior of transitioning to another task. You as a teacher are monitoring and reinforcing positive behaviors. Now I'm going to give you a little tip. My favorite thing to be able to transition my students from task to task is this little wireless doorbell. It simply plugs into the wall. It has a little battery inside, so that does need to be replaced every once in a while. And you can choose from 30 different chimes. I found this on Amazon for about $10. It's a lifesaver. What I see a lot of teachers do, they put a little bit of Velcro on the back of it, and they Velcro it to their badge. So that way it can either stay there at the end of the day, or you can take it off at the end of the day and only put it on there on your badge when you need it. That way it's handy. And like I said, 30 different alerts that you can switch through. So what I do is at the 18-minute mark, I ring it once. And at the 20-minute mark, I ring it twice. And once I ring it twice, they know it's time to switch. And again, they don't hear it again until the 18-minute mark, means time to clean up. The 20-minute mark, it's time to switch or time to put things away to go on to the next class. Lifesaver. You're not having to say, okay, class, no. No callbacks, no yelling, no trying to talk over them, this right here. And you can do this while still teaching in your small group. You can still be focusing on your students at your small group table and working with them and just easily ring that doorbell. Easy. So week 2 is about implementing some of those tasks and reinforcing those, reinforcing those positive behaviors. Now in week 3, we're going to switch it up a little bit. It's the same as week 2, where students in groups doing 2 different tasks, but this time students are going to rotate from task to task. So they are actually physically going to move from table or desks to the next table or desks so that they can understand, okay, this task is here and it stays here. This task is here and it stays here. Now, this is where I want to put a little caveat. You know your class. If your class is not able to handle moving from station to station, the easiest thing I can tell you to do, table 1, pass to table 2, table 2, pass to table 1. That way they're passing and rotating their task from table to table. It's still the same thing, just students aren't up and moving from one table to another. And then in week 4, students are in their groups, rotating through all of the tasks, whether it be 4 tasks, 3 tasks, however many you choose, and you are still monitoring and reinforcing. At this point, you have not started guided math yet. You have not started your small groups. You will start that in week 5. The reason it takes 4 weeks is you want to set in stone the behaviors you're expecting. And you want to reinforce those positive behaviors. Just like we do in the beginning of the school year, we take time to go over rules and procedures and how you want things to go in your class. When you're implementing something like Math Workshop that a lot of times students haven't seen since elementary school, if even then, you have to take time to let them understand things and how things work. Now, let's talk about how this would work for remote learning. Now, in remote learning, should only take 3 weeks before we go into small group. So in week 1, whether you're in Zoom or Google Classroom, however you're doing it, all students are doing the same task. The teacher is monitoring by watching the screens and reinforcing positive behaviors. During this time, you would give it as independent instruction. You wouldn't want them to break out into small groups yet. You want them working on a simple task that is independent. Then, upon completion, and it may not even be completion, upon completion of the time frame, about 20 minutes, have a class discussion over the task, and then students can submit any of their work. Now, they may not have completed it, and that is okay. It is 125,000,000% okay. During week 2, break students into small groups, doing 2 different tasks. For the first 20 minutes, they do one task, then they move on to the other task. The benefit on something like Zoom, using an online learning management software, you can break students into small groups. And you can push into each of the small groups and listen to what they're doing and reinforcing those positive behaviors. Now, during this time, you'd be like, well, how do my students collaborate? Google Drive, if you open up a Google document, it can be a slide, it can be a document. I prefer using a document. And I started doing this actually when I was still in college. And every student would type their name at the top, and they would highlight their name in whatever different color they planned to type in. And anytime Johnny would type something, he may have chose blue. So all of the work or communication on the page in blue, that was Johnny. Tabitha may have chose orange, Sally may have chose pink, and Thomas may have chose green. That way a teacher can easily know who did what work. This is also great if you're doing some interactive activities through Google Forms or other learning softwares, and the students are doing the work on the activity, but then maybe one other person is documenting in Google Slide or Google Drive to where Google Sheets, that's what it is. I think so. You can tell I use slides more than anything, slides and forms. To be able to document the communication that was going on. Then in week 3, students in their group rotating through all of the tasks with monitoring and reinforcing. And by week 4, you should be able to pull for small group instruction. And we're going to talk more about small group instruction going on. But at this point, I know I've been talking for quite a bit, and you are probably a little overwhelmed. So I want you to take a moment, pause this video, and talk with the teachers at your table about what you've understood so far about implementing Math Workshop in your class. Welcome back. I hope you had some good discussions about Math Workshop and how to implement it in your class. And remember, if you have any questions, make sure you write those questions down because we are going to have Q&A time at the end. So the next part about setting your students up for success is giving them understandable tasks. And I have to tell you, first and foremost with Math Workshop, do not provide students with activities on current material. When you give a student an activity on current material, say something you've taught from Monday or Tuesday, they're frustrated because they don't necessarily understand 100%. They have not had small group time with you. They have not been able to practice to the fullest extent. They get frustrated, they give up, they act out, and that's when we lose them. And that's when they stop. You want them to continue to buy in by being successful. When students are able to be successful, you're going to keep their interest. And so the activities that you use for Math Workshop need to be streamlined. You need to be using activities that are for review and for enrichment, not new skills. Let me say that again. Review and enrichment, not new skills. That opens you up to a whole different plethora of activities as well, because you can use the data you have from their prior year on their testing. You're like, this is a weak area. I know I need to beef up this area because if I don't beef up this standard, whether it be probability or statistics, then when we get to that in the spring, they're going to get frustrated. And it's going to be even harder for us to get through what we need to understand. Or it's March and we haven't talked about converting rational numbers in a while, so let's practice that some more. It's going to not only benefit the student, but it's also going to benefit you as a teacher because you aren't going to get interrupted at your small group table because students are not having to ask questions when it's material that's already been taught and they're in their small groups and working with their peers. It's going to save time on their questions and it's going to save off-task behavior. It also promotes students to work independently and as a group because it's a task that they understand. Now, remember, you don't need new tasks all the time. The great thing about Math Workshop is this. One, you can choose a set of activities. I'm going to say 4 because that's how many stations I used, and just change the concepts each week. So you may have it to where students are going to do an independent activity, a technology activity, a task card activity, and a game. I'm just going to throw that out there. And I'll go more into detail on those later, but every week you would just choose, okay, we used task cards last week, we're just going to use a different set of task cards this week. Or if you are familiar with my solve and snips, that could be your independent activity every week. And all you're doing each week is students are going to switch out which solve and snip they use. And I'll show you more of these later. It's an activity that we're going to do. So it's making your life easier by working smarter, not harder. Now, when we talked about earlier, spending time with our students, showing them what we expect, this is also something I do in the first week. I go through and create an anchor chart with my students, and I do this with each class period. And then at the end of the day, I put it all together into one poster and hang it up. But I go through and I tell students what Math Workshop looks like, what Math Workshop sounds like, what their job is, and what my job is. And you could see I gave hand motions. So the reason I gave hand motions is that if I am back at my table working with a group of students and I see an activity that is happening that is not an expectation, I can simply look at a student, I can point to my eye, and they know that they are not looking like what they should be doing for Math Workshop. Same with sounds like. If I hear them talking about skateboarding that they're going to be doing after school, that's not math talk. So I can toggle my ear and look at that student. Well, if that student's not looking at me, I guarantee you that someone in that group is looking at me, and I can look at them and I can say, your job, get their attention. Once they've got that student's attention, I can say sounds like, and then they know. And then we also talk about what their jobs are and what my job is. Their job is to stay on task and work on their station and work together with their group. Notice on the your job, it does not say complete every station 100%. Because like I said earlier, Math Workshop is for review and enrichment. It is not for completion. Now, I know a lot of you are probably asking me about grading. And I graded Math Workshop, but I graded it based on completion. So for my students, they turned in their work every week, and I would look through and see their activities and be like, did they get it to their best ability? Did they complete as much as they should have in the time given? Because you also have to remember, they're being pulled for small group from those activities. And so they're being taken away from doing some activities. And I would just have my students jot on something, or I would even note in my notes and say, Johnny was pulled from independent work, or Johnny was pulled from technology work, so that I would know, and I would just keep a spreadsheet in my binder really quick, and I could just put a T next to it or A for at your seat. So I would know exactly what each person was being pulled from, so that when they submitted their work in the end, I could judge it. And you don't have to grade it at all. You don't even have to grade it every week. You could grade it some weeks and not others. And then on here with my job. My job is to work with small groups. My job is to have student conferences, answer questions, and to teach about math and listen and learn about math. My job is not to have to deal with behavior problems, because I've set those expectations of what Math Workshop looks like and sounds like. Now, let me go in a little bit more about planning Math Workshop. I'll tell you, planning is one of my favorite things. So at this point, I used an acronym for Math Workshop. And the reason I did is because it made it easy for me to be able to set up activities every week. So they had M, A, T, and H. Math facts, at your seat, talk to me, which I've since also added tech time. I did not have technology in my classroom, so we weren't able to use tech. So that's why I had talk to me, which was always an activity centered around communicating with their group, and hands-on fun. Those were my 4 activities that my students did. Now, another thing, and let me stop screen share real quick. For the remote learning class, so first off, this is how I did mine in my classroom. So I had my math learning board, and I'm gonna take it out of that because it's a shine. So these were the activities they did for each of those. I always had a secondary activity, and that was because sometimes a group would finish the first activity, or I would need to differentiate and I would give them a second activity, be like, okay, this group, y'all can do the second activity. And that was all handled away from the whole class. I would tell individual groups, okay, hey, I want y'all doing the second activity instead of the first activity. Sometimes I'd let them choose, and that's totally okay. I made sure that the activities aligned. So whatever they were doing up here, it aligned to what they were doing down here. Sometimes they were completely random, and that's totally fine. This could also be week 1, week 2. So you're doing 2 weeks at a time. And each of my groups had a copy of this. And I also had it posted up in the classroom. So that way students could look at any time and see what they were doing. Now, I also used this for some of my accommodations in my classroom. Some of my students needed to be able to see what they were working on at all times. I had an autistic student in particular who needed to have a sense of a completion. So I actually only gave him a half for whatever half he was working on. And whenever he had completed that task, he could mark it out. It was a sense of completion that he had to have. But it also would make the math menu or the math board right there available for students to see. And it's a nice big font. And I'm going to send this to y'all in some of the files I'm going to send you as an editable file. For my remote learners, and this can even work in the classroom, but specifically for my remote learners, because our students are doing a lot of independent work and fewer group work activities, I would use what's called a math menu. And I have this available, again, I'm going to send this to you, as 4 activities, but also 3 activities. So there's the appetizers course, the super salad course, the main course, and the dessert course. And you're going to be able to edit what week it is, how many of each activity to do, and write the activities for students to complete for those. And I know it's reversed because of the camera, but you get the idea. And there's a little chef's hat right there. So these were the ways that I helped myself organize. And the great thing about these is you can use this for every class. So let me go back to screen sharing. So when I talk about fact fluency, I focused on fact fluency in my classroom. And fact fluency for many people are thinking, oh, that's multiplication facts, that's division facts, addition, subtraction facts. If you look up what fact fluency it actually includes factors, equivalent fractions, adding and subtracting integers, multiplication and division facts through 12s. These are things that our students struggle with beyond middle school. As a 7th and 8th grade teacher myself, I had students who could not multiply, who could not tell me what 5 times 6 was without going, okay, 5 times 5, 10, 50. And it was a struggle. And I was like, we haven't had enough practice if you cannot tell me 5 times 6 is 30, just like that. If you can't add 5 plus -6 to get 1, if you can't do some of these things with automaticity. So that is why every single week I had an activity that promoted fact fluency. Every single week. Because of this right here, you will see the repercussions in everything else you do in your classroom. These basic 5 areas are some of the foundations for everything we do. Think about how equivalent fractions plays into ratios. Adding and subtracting numbers plays into, oh, so many things. Factors, but multiplication and division. We can't do Pythagorean theorem without multiplication. We have to have our students understand these foundational fact fluency standards. So here's a quick little activity. If in my classroom, and this was something we did quite regularly, I would have my students get a deck of cards, and I will tell you, one, Dollar Tree has them all the time, really cheap, but also contact some of your local, contact casinos, either in Vegas or Louisiana or other states that have casinos, and ask them if you can have some of their cards. Tell them it's for a school, and they will more than likely send them to you. So for this, you remove all of the kings and jokers from your deck and you shuffle. They will need either a dry erase board, or they can just show this on our camera if they're remote. And jacks are worth 11, queens are worth 12, and aces are worth 1 point. So player 1 will flip over 2 cards and place them next to each other, multiply the 2 cards together, and the first one to find the total between player 1 and player 2 covers the space with their marker. And there's a mat that I'm gonna send to this. Player 2 repeats, and step 2, and the play continues. If a total is found an additional time, then the first person is bumped off and the second person captures the space. So again, it practices multiplication. So if I laid down a 10 and a 2, I would do 10 times 2, that's 20. I would find 20 on the board. I would place one of my markers there. And then player 2 would repeat. Say player 2 picked up a king and an ace. Well, an ace is 1, or sorry, 3 and an ace. An ace is 1, so 3 times 1 is 3. I would cover that space. Well, then player 1, 4 times 5, but player 2 got it this time. Well, remember in the first one, the answer was 20. So they could cover up that 20 that player 1 had already covered, and now they've captured that space. And in the end, it's all about who captures the most number of spaces by the end of time. And they can play this over and over and over. The great thing about this is one of those activities that is easy to do. Easy. It requires a deck of cards in some sort of marker, whether it be a plastic chip, whether you put the board inside of a protective sleeve, like a Smart Cow, and then they just mark it out with their dry erase. And the great thing is this can be done remotely. Students would just need their own copy of the mat, their own deck, which most students, I would say, probably have a deck of cards at home. And if they don't, you might be able to find one online in online manipulatives. And then they would just need a copy of the mat and a marker or a crayon or a pencil. And they could easily do this as well. Managing math workshop. This is my least favorite task to talk about because we know that management can be frustrating at times. Now, in this part, I'm talking about management as of how to organize things. And I kind of talked about this just a moment ago when I talked about using math menus and math boards. And this is basically planning it out for what students are going to do each week. Students are motivated by the rotations that are going on in the classroom, or when students are motivated by what is going on in the classroom and the different types of activities, very little classroom management is going to be needed by you, because students are excited to be doing something different than what they would normally be doing. How many of you remember growing up and all math was sit and get? I remember many math classes that the teachers sat at the overhead and would just work problem after problem after problem after problem. And I was supposed to understand it just by going through these problems and writing them down furiously in my notebook. And that's not the way our brains work. That's not the way students work, they need to sit and do and play. And not just in the young ages, in the older ages as well. And that is something that Math Workshop provides. I've talked to you a little bit about Math Workshop and how I implemented it in my classroom. And that was, I did a whole group lesson on Monday and Tuesday, Math Workshop on Wednesday and Thursday, and then an assessment group project or another lesson or catch-up day on Friday as needed. This really was beneficial in my classroom because students were able to know the pattern. And it was beneficial to me because I had a set pattern. Now, if something came up and say, hey, we had a Wednesday off, but I still wanted, or we had Monday off from school, like we did this week, we would just shift things, and that Friday would become that makeup day, or I would shift things around. But I really liked having my Math Workshop days on the same days every week because it lets students know what to expect. Cooperative grouping. This is something that I talk about, and I am passionate about this way. When you are putting students in groups for Math Workshop, you should put students in groups of mixed abilities. You don't want students in groups of the same ability because then the communication aspect is not as deep. When we put students together of mixed ability, low, medium, high, it allows students to work off each other's strengths and communicate their personal learning. Think about how much you have learned from a student or from another peer simply because you didn't understand it the same way they did, or it didn't come through the same way. And this little step right here is also why when you pull for guided math, there's going to be students from different groups, so no one group is canceling out each time. You may have 2 from the M, 2 from A, 1 from T, and 1 from H, all coming to your teacher table, and that's perfectly fine. Because then those groups can still go on with what they're doing. Clustered learning. Students can and should be regularly rotated within different groups. One, this helps with behavior issues. It also provides flexibility with students, and it allows that communication skill and to be deepened within other students in the classroom. And to be able to determine how I group my students, I used informal assessments to be able to set groups up, knowing that I could change them at any time. Anytime. The great thing about Math Workshops is they do not change as often as guided math groups. Guided math groups could be different every single week because it's going to depend on what you're teaching in your guided math groups, or what you're going over, or what you're reviewing, or if you need to do student conferences. But Math Workshop groups should stay the same for a good 4 to 6 weeks to give them time to work with each other and build that understanding. And build that community, build that family experience of learning. We talked about before about managing expectations. And I found this little chart, and it's really important to know what Math Workshop is and what Math Workshop is not. And I think the biggest thing here that I pull from it is it is student-centered, not teacher-centered. It is group-centered and not independent-centered. Now, I know that's a struggle right now with remote learning, but that is one using small groups within our classroom management system is important. Now, I know it may be a little bit harder to facilitate those small groups and managing, but it's all about setting those expectations up ahead of time. And if there is any way that you have the ability to have someone else monitoring those small groups, that would be great as well. Now, I know that's not always possible, but it is an option. Like I said before, you're probably thinking about school right now and you probably need a little bit of a break. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a break. I'm going to stop this video right here, and then I'm going to come back to you with the next video to where we talk a little bit more about the last few steps of success for setting up math workshop in your classroom. And then video 3, we will be doing some activities together. So I'll see you in a bit.